Andrew Marr joins me, LBC presenter Monday to Thursday, as you well know, from 6 o'clock, and political editor of the New Statesman. Andrew, is this or series of fatal blows, the two election defeats and the resignation of Oliver Dowden, are they fatal blows or is it just another winnable fight in Johnson land?
Sheila, we shouldn't assume that anything that happens to Boris Johnson is politically fatal. He goes on like a kind of great tousle-headed bulldozer through all of these events, one after another, and he's trying to do it again today. But I think we should say we are a democracy, when we've had two such huge by-election defeats, particularly the one in Tiverton, as Theo was saying, a historic number there. You can't just shrug it off and say, oh, well, we'll move on. These are the people actually speaking. And I think it's a stinging and pretty pulverizing rebuke to the Prime Minister. It suggests the government does not have a sense of direction that its own voters acknowledge and recognise. And what I thought was very interesting in Boris Johnson's response there to Oliver Dowden, the former party chairman, he did not reply in any way to Oliver Dowden's key sentence. Oliver Dowden said, our supporters are distressed and disappointed by recent events, and I share their feelings. Now, by recent events, he doesn't mean Glastonbury. He's talking about things much nearer to home. And to say he himself was disappointed and distressed is quite a big thing. He, of course, backed Boris Johnson when that vote happened as a loyal member of the government. He'd have to. But Oliver Dowden is an absolutely crucial figure. He's quiet, he's rather restrained. You see him on television and he looks almost nervous, but he's a steely and experienced political strategist who has been very, very important to the Conservatives beginning the attempt to build up towards the next general election. And the real question is, does anybody follow him out of the cabinet?
How much worse is it for Boris Johnson that he is so far away and, as things stand, insisting he's going to stay away for the next 8 days or 7 days?
Well, now he's away, coming back early would look even worse. It would look like a kind of hurried return to the country. People may remember Jim Callaghan flying back at the end of the 1970s when his government was falling apart. And I think it was the Sun newspaper, actually, it wasn't him, who said, crisis, what's crisis, as he arrived at the airport. But wanging back into the country at the last moment is never a good look. So one way or another, I think he's stuck there. It does give Conservative MPs a little bit more time and space to plot, however.
You mentioned there that the key thing to watch for is other big cabinet beasts to make a move of some sort. Do you have? I mean, you don't have to name them, but do you have anyone in mind? Do you think there is movement there? Because they've been heavily criticised, the cabinet, for sitting on their hands a number of times, haven't they?
To be absolutely honest, and to use a Scottish phrase you may recognise, Sheila, I don't think any of them have the stones for it. Okay. They've had many opportunities to express disquiet. It's almost too late now. And you have to remember that anybody who took on Johnson now and won would then have a pretty miserable year or year and a half ahead because the economy is tanking. We're in real trouble with inflation. Nothing seems to be going right. The war goes on. So it's not a pretty job to pick up. It's not a good job prospectus for anybody. I think what's really been lacking in this story, in a sense, is because I'm an old so-and-so, I've been around a long time. I remember covering the fall of Margaret Thatcher as a reporter. And during that period, there was always Michael Heseltine he was always prowling around in the background like a kind of mangy tiger snarling in the rhododendrons, as it were. And you always thought, well, if Margaret Thatcher isn't leader, he will be. So there was somebody there saying, look, this leader is not good enough, not taking us in the right direction. I can do it. Follow me.
Not even Jeremy Hunt?
Well, if Jeremy Hunt was that figure, he'd be on LBC right now explaining why Boris Johnson was no good and why Jeremy Hunt government would be better. I've got a lot of time for Jeremy Hunt. I think he's a really punctilious, decent, serious politician.
But he's playing a cautious game, is he?
Yeah. Boris Johnson, the time comes when you have to actually do it.
Yeah. Is he being too cautious in your view?
I would have thought anyone who wants to be the next Conservative leader and isn't coming out now is being too cautious. Yet again, if not now, when? But, these big jobs, there is something sort of visceral and Serengeti-like about it. The biggest beast who wants the job most tends to get it or keep it. And at the moment, that biggest beast seems to be Boris Johnson. I've called him the albino gorilla. And he kind of squats across the cabinet table, and nobody else looks anything like big enough to take him on.
And this is what George Osborne said, similar, didn't he, 10 days ago, fortnight ago? He said it's about politics is about power, and he is the one who wants it most and has it most at the moment.
Yes, I was having that conversation with George Osborne, and I have to say I thoroughly agree with him. At sort of key moments in our political history, it's about courage, it's about self-belief, it's about taking on the big guy, and nobody is at the moment.
Away from the Conservatives and from Boris Johnson as the leader and as the Prime Minister, let's look at the other parties. Labour's win in Wakefield is big, but it's not as big as the win that Corbyn got for them in 2017. It looks as though Conservatives are staying away rather than going full-throated behind Keir Starmer and the party as he has it at the moment. How do you interpret that?
Well, two things to say, I think, about the opposition parties. First is that both opposition leaders, but particularly Keir Starmer, will look a little bit different in public as a result of this. Winning elections does an awful lot for your image, and people who thought he was completely useless will now be slightly revising their opinion. He'll just have a bit more authority and a bit more heft than he did at the beginning of this week. And so that's very important for him. But the other thing is, if you look at, for instance, the total collapse of the Labour vote in Tiverton, there's a lot of tactical voting going on. And I think if we look ahead at the next election, what we're going to see, if the Conservatives are to be removed from power, that'll be because the opposition parties, they don't have a pact, they don't have an agreement, there's no signing of a document or that, but they concentrate on different seats. And in effect, voters will be told that, the Lib Dems here or the Labour Party there, or possibly even the SNP in Scotland, they are the main challenger to the Conservatives in this seat. And it won't be that Keir Starmer does some deal with Ed Davey. I'm going to promise you proportional representation or something and a coalition government if we win. Nothing like that will happen because it would leak and it would so derail the election campaign that the Conservatives would use it very, very effectively. But I think simply Keir Starmer will say, well, I've got limited amounts of money. There's no point in me pouring Labour resources into seats where we are third, where the Liberal Democrats are the main challengers. We'll put up candidates so everyone gets a choice, but we won't work very hard there. And the Lib Dems will do the same thing. And it will be a very, very different kind of election we see as a result.
And if Labour were to win that election, and it is an if, presumably that would mean a very small majority if they won. I mean, I heard Louise Haigh this morning saying I'd take that, but is that does that automatically flow really from?
Well, it's a very hard prospect for anyone because I don't think the country will be in a particularly good state by the time of the next election. Looking at what's going on in the economy now, and all the problems we've got ahead, a new government is going to have to take us in a different direction, make big choices. Having a small majority makes that very difficult indeed. And that's why, on balance at the moment, I think it's more likely that we would see some kind of Lib-Lab coalition or something to that effect.
I was interested to see in a sort of breakdown of what voters were saying on the doorsteps in Tiverton, in particular, that actually and in Wakefield as well, that pay and profit was coming up a lot. Now, there's no doubt, is there, that Mick Lynch has made a better fist of landing that message or his answer to that message than Keir Starmer has perhaps ever.
Well, as we sit here this morning, there is no doubt at all, Sheila, that Mick Lynch is the most persuasive main political figure in the country. Lots of people may be very angry with the RMT and all the rest of it, but he is a silver-tongued champion of the working class like no other. Keir Starmer is a punctilious and serious public lawyer who doesn't have that kind of hool, as the Welsh would say. I don't think I've said that right, but you know what I mean, hool. He just, and it's very, if you don't have it, you can't acquire it. But as other people have said, we've seen an awful lot of, the effects of charisma and showboating and all the rest of it with Boris Johnson. It may well be that the country doesn't want any of that, quite likes the idea of a quieter, slightly duller leader.
Okay, well, let's see what happens
not good for
in
us.
The next few days. No, not good for us. We're like the wild ones. Thanks very much indeed. That was Andrew Marr. You can hear him Mondays to Thursdays, of course, from 6 o'clock on LBC. And thank you.